Singapore's first local Omicron case, a Changi Airport frontline worker who was asymptomatic when detected. ASTRAZENECA's new antibody drug for COVID-19 treatment is set to arrive in Singapore by year-end.
I think you have not answered her question. Why did President Biden not invite Singapore to the summit of democracy? That's her question.
Oh, was that your question?
Yes, that's her question.
He read my mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in today's Asian Insider segment, why Singapore was left off President Biden's guest list. Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Olivia Quay. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. Singapore reporting its first local Omicron case yesterday. A frontline worker at Changi Airport who tested preliminarily positive for the variant. What we know about this case. She's a 24-year-old Singaporean woman working as a passenger service staff member at Terminals 1 and 3. She also worked in the transit holding area, where the Health Ministry said she may have interacted with transit passengers from Omicron-affected countries. She was asymptomatic when tested for COVID-19 on December the 8th as part of the weekly rostered routine testing. She's fully vaccinated and has also received her booster shot. Contact tracing is underway and her close contacts will be placed on a 10-day quarantine at designated facilities. Dr. Asok Kurup is here. He's an infectious diseases physician at Mount Elizabeth Hospital and chairs the Academy of Medicine's chapter of infectious disease physicians. Welcome back to The Big Story, Doctor. So the local Omicron case and her passenger-facing, shall we say, role at Changi Airport. What does that tell you about Omicron's transmissibility? Is it different from how previous variants would have leaked into the community?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Olivia, and I hope you're keeping well. Taking one step back, actually, to be honest, we are quite grateful that we even detected such cases in the first place, which is a testament to surveillance and the fact that we have to keep up with such so that we actually know where the cases of Omicron are in the first place. So I think that no matter people tend to get distracted, oh, we have a case, but look at it, we actually managed to detect it. So that actually is something that I wanted to put out there. So we don't know the details epidemiologically as yet as to what transpired as to how this individual got herself infected. So while the press release, I believe, says that she was in the passenger transit area where she came into contact with passengers coming from Omicron's reporting countries, we don't know the details as to whether there was a breach, some form of infection control breach one way or the other, either by way of the passengers or by way of the employee and so on. So all these things matter because no doubt we know a lot about the transmissibility and you were asking about any leak and so on, but to understand this would be important. The other thing that would be quite telling is there's going to be a cluster around this particular employee. So if there's going to be a cluster and it starts to grow, then that will be quite, pointing in the direction that, yes, this is a leak and that, this is going to be several other leaks out there in the community as well, So we don't know yet about that. If this is just an isolated case, then so be it, under control. So whether or not we have to do separate measures in the context of segregation, in the context of what they're doing in Changi already, will very much depend on the investigations.
Well, Dr. Kurup, this airport worker, she wasn't the only new Omicron case reported yesterday. There was another preliminarily positive Omicron case, an imported one. Well, this person is a Singapore PR who actually tested negative in her on-arrival PCR test on December the 6th, but was found to have signs of Omicron on December the 8th after she saw a doctor for a runny nose. Doc, does this suggest that there may be many more cases like that out there?
Just the tip of the iceberg, I think. We saw this happening with Delta. I don't think we can say this is not going to happen again with Omicron, especially since we know what's happening in parts of the world, like in South Africa, where it was reported first on its transmissibility and so on, that, before long, we're going to see way many more cases. I think we just have to be aware that that's something that is going to happen, whether we like it or not. And we are just seeing the first few cases. Again, let me say, then I said this again, that it's a good thing that we are picking up these cases in the first place. You know, how this individual got picked up. And so that in itself is already a way that we are controlling the amount of community spread. Because if you don't have a system of surveillance in place where people can go around and infect so many before they're getting detected, then that would be bad. So we are detecting cases. We can try to mitigate the onward spread and transmission as best as we can. So I think that, you know, we have got robust systems. We have learned over the last couple of years. Gosh, it has been a couple of years. Yeah, so, you know, we have systems in place. I think, you know, we should not be alarmed, you know, and I think we are going to anticipate many more cases and potentially clusters in the community moving forwards. But I don't think we need to be unduly alarmed.
Well, Doctor, let's shift our attention to how effective vaccine booster shots are against Omicron. In your expert opinion, how long should a person wait before getting a booster? And, you know, how many booster shots are necessary? As well as, you know, does it matter what kind of combinations we take?
Oh, you know, we are still in kindergarten or nursery when it comes to the learning curve in this regard, because there is so little that we know, so many unanswered questions. Pfizer tells us that a booster is helpful because, you know, after just 2 doses of their vaccine, their capacity to repel the virus is not as good. If you get a 3rd dose, then, you know, it can boost up levels 25-fold, and that kind of reconstitutes some form of prevention. But these are tests that were done as experiments. I think the real data will eventually be if and when there are clinical studies, which I think we are waiting to see, and more information subsequently, maybe in the weeks to come. But well, the up-to-date data, shall we say, tells us that, you know, as far as Pfizer is concerned, that a booster might be helpful. But I think that, you know, while we wait for more information from other companies like Moderna, who is thinking of amplifying their dose of their 3rd dose vaccine from 50 to 100 micrograms and so on, we also must understand that there is this other aspect of our immune system, which is called the T-cell response. And in this regard, the T-cell response is not as badly affected by this Omicron's multiple, mutations, because it can still work even though there are many mutations on Omicron. And we fail to understand that there is this other aspect of the immune system that can help us prevent severe infection. And I think that has helped us through with Delta, and there's no reason why it should not help us also with Omicron, given the principles of how it can work even despite all the mutations that are seen on Omicron. We have very little data because South Africa is not a heavily vaccinated state. But we do know that the vaccinated persons within the country are not doing too badly. So we are hopeful that, you know, the vaccine, even though if you have received 2 doses, there will still be some amount of protection. So the boosting that you asked whether you should do a different one specifically for Omicron, we don't have enough data. For Delta, we know that maybe our local studies show that if you do a Pfizer, Moderna, that might actually be a little bit more helpful compared with Pfizer, for example. But I can't tell you the same is going to hold true for the Omicron variant. So it is still something that we have to keep understanding. So I think the end deal is go get your booster if you haven't had that already. I think it's still going to be helpful. But whether we need to keep getting boosters and keep getting shots at this point in time, I don't think there's enough information to tell us that.
Well, Dr. Kurup, thank you so much for taking the time today. Dr. Asok Kurup, infectious diseases physician with Mount Elizabeth Hospital. In other news, Singapore has signed an agreement with ASTRAZENECA to buy its Evusheld antibody drug as a treatment for COVID-19. Supply is expected to arrive by the end of the year. Now, this drug cocktail is a combination of two so-called long antibodies, which take longer to metabolize in the body and can provide longer lasting protection for up to a year. Based on phase 3 clinical trials, it's able to reduce the risk of severe disease or death by 88% when given to patients with mild to moderate COVID-19 within 3 days of the onset of symptoms. Overseas, starting January the 10th, Australia will vaccinate children 5 to 11 years old with Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. Only a handful of nations so far are offering the shots to this age group, including Canada, Israel and the US.
Democracies are not all the same. We don't agree on everything, all of us in this meeting today. But the choices we make together are going to define, in my view, the course of our shared future for generations to come. And as a global community for democracy, we have to stand up for the values that unite us. We have to stand for justice and the rule of law, for free speech, free assembly, a free press, freedom of religion, and for all the inherent human rights of every individual.
US President Joe Biden hosting more than 100 world leaders at a 2-day summit for democracy, warning that global freedoms are under threat by autocrats. For this week's Asian Insider segment, we're joined by US Bureau Chief Nirmal Ghosh. So, Nirmal, what was the main feature on the first day of the summit? And when President Biden says the US is going to lead by example, how does he intend to do that?
Yes, well, media focus was a big part of the agenda today. It was pointed out that 23 journalists have been killed globally so far this year just for doing their jobs. The most recent one, as we know, was a Filipino journalist who was killed in his home while he was sitting watching TV with his wife, and that happened just this week. Ironically, around the same time as Maria Ressa, the Filipina journalist, was on her way to Oslo to receive her Nobel Peace Prize. So President Biden came out quite strongly, and I quote, he said, "A free and independent media is a bedrock of democracy, and the US is committing critical seed money to sustain independent media around the world. This includes a new defamation defense fund for journalists." Now, as to the US leading by example, that is a challenge. So far, the agenda has somewhat stalled. Voting rights legislation has been rolled back in some states. The Biden administration wants to extend voting rights, but that legislation is not going anywhere. There are also two separate probes of the former president, Donald Trump, over the nature of his involvement in the January 6th insurrection, and also essentially a corruption probe into his organization. Corruption is also a key element of this democracy summit, a key agenda point. The challenge is particularly acute in America because the idea has been planted by former President Trump that the 2020 election was stolen, and many of his supporters believe it. We saw what happened on January 6th when his supporters attacked the Capitol. That was a wake-up moment, and passions are not any lower. And in fact, the Democrats seem set to lose control of both the House and the Senate in the midterms about 11 months from now, and that will make any legislation to counter voting restrictions, to counter gerrymandering of electoral districts, very difficult. And that is not to speak of the larger problems. Many scholars say that American democracy is plagued by an outdated two-party system and the electoral college system. We saw that Donald Trump came to power in 2016, losing the popular vote but winning the electoral college. And another issue is the vast income disparity in the United States, which President Biden is very cognizant of, but that is seen as a left-wing agenda, and that is another problem. So the US is definitely in a bind at home in terms of its credibility, the credibility of its own democracy, and these problems are not going to be solved very quickly.
Well, Nirmal, as you know, like China and Russia, Singapore was not invited to the summit. Well, let's take a listen at this exchange yesterday between Ambassador at Large Tommy Koh and US Embassy Deputy Chief of Mission Rafiq Mansour at an event organized by the Straits Times.
I think you have not answered her question. No. Why did President Biden not invite Singapore to the summit of democracy? That's her question.
Oh, was that your question?
Yes, that's her question.
He read my mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
The answer is very simple. There are a limited number of countries, and it does not reflect on the depth and the breadth of the relationship and the partnership that we have with Singapore. We have a lot to learn from Singapore.
That's a non-answer. I mean, come on, let's be truthful, no? The truth is that, and I think Heng Chi Bilhari will confirm this, the Democratic Party had never accepted Singapore as a democracy. When President Clinton hosted this equivalent summit, he also didn't invite Singapore to the summit.
Right, so what do you make of this, Normal? Have officials in Washington given a reason for not inviting Singapore to the summit?
Well, I spoke with Azra Zia, who's Under-Secretary of State for Civilian Security, Democracy and Human Rights, and I asked her about the fact that Singapore and other countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Bhutan are not at this summit. And what she said was, and I quote here, "Our goal was to be as inclusive as possible within logistical constraints. We are going to continue engaging with some participants, but also other governments around the world to address democratic backsliding, to promote respect for human rights, to defend against corruption, both at home and abroad, whether that work occurs within or outside the summit framework." And separately, what we are hearing is that the basic strategic calculus does not change if a country is not at this summit. The US-Singapore relationship, for example, is very broad-based, and Singapore being not at this summit will not change that relationship to any significant degree.
US Bureau Chief there, Namal Ghosh. The full video with Ambassador-at-Large Tommy Koh's remarks is available on the Straits Times' YouTube page. He was speaking at the launch of a Straits Times press book on the US through a Singapore perspective. Elsewhere, a trial date has been set on June 6th next year for a Singaporean man accused of murdering his wife while they were visiting Newcastle in the UK. Fong Sung Hurt was arrested Monday after his wife, Pek Ying Ling, was found dead in a luxury apartment. Back home, this year's President's Science Award goes to Wang Linfa, also known as Batman. The Duke NUS Medical School professor is best known for tracing SARS back to bats and is currently involved in COVID-19 research. Hey, if you ever want to learn how to cook some classic Singapore dishes, then you should definitely check out ST's upcoming 6-part series with Cooking Guru Violet Oon. The first episode drops this Sunday, December the 12th on the Straits Times' YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to it by hitting the red button below. Take care, and I'll see you soon.
And that's a rhythm, you know. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. When you want to handle prawns, what I find, if you're leaving the prawns whole, this part can take revenge on you, you know, and stab
Yes.
you. So actually, you cut it away.
Yes. Oh, we can always take revenge back on them by frying them, right?
Okay. You're going to have Perrier Jouet, Blanc de Blanc. Oh, wow! Bravo! You've done it, come. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Next one. Better than mine, okay. Next to it. Wow, wonderful, Hedy. You can do for your auntie already.
No way.
One more.